Welcome to Fireside Giants. My name is Zach, with my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo. Today, we're going to be breaking down two receivers that the Giants could target in the mid-rounds, really mid to late rounds. Some underrated guys that might provide some value as depth pieces or maybe even starters eventually, or some special teams guys. You know, Joe Judge loves to have those quality special teamers, whether it's a return man, a gunner. We saw Cody Coro go down last year and they had some problems on special teams, so upgrading that unit will likely be a priority. So, as for the Giants, wide receiver is a big need this year. And, we've been talking about the free agents, whether it be Corey Davis, Curtis Samuel, Kenny Golladay, Allen Robinson. We've talked about all of them, and then some. And obviously the first-round targets, second-round targets like Rondale Moore, Kadarius Toney, Jamar Chase, the whole lot. But there are a bunch of really good mid-round options the Giants can look at and say, they can provide value, whether it be on special teams or as a receiver. And we're going to talk about a few guys. So, Anthony, my friend, before we dive into the two prospects we have in mind, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. A little tired, a little sluggish, but I'm ready to rock and roll and record this episode. In terms of these wide receivers, I'll go ahead and say their names. Amari Rodgers out of Clemson, Tamorrion Terry out of FSU. These are two really exciting prospects for very different reasons, okay? And but they are late-round prospects, all right? That's something that we need to make clear. There's a reason that these guys aren't projected to go in the second or third round. And so we're not talking about them as guys that we think would, fix the Giants' wide receiver problems. That's not what we're discussing here. We're discussing guys that the Giants could take a flyer on, take a chance on in those late rounds, and see if maybe they can develop these guys into being solid contributors in the future. That's really what we're talking about here. Now, one of them, Tamorrion Terry, a lot of fans of football really see a super high ceiling with him and really think that he could be a guy that changes a team's wide receiver corps, right? But it's kind of debatable. He's a late-round prospect for a reason. There's a few reasons that we will discuss once we start to get into it. But I know Alex is a pretty big fan of Amari Rodgers as well, so I'll let you kick it off with him.
Yeah, Amari Rodgers is a really interesting prospect. He kind of looks like a Kareem Hunt type of body frame, but he's more of a receiver. And I do like him based on his receiving abilities. He's also a good kick returner. That's something the Giants have really kind of revolved at the last couple of years, trying to figure out who's going to be their primary kick returner. Amari Rodgers can get it done. He is shifty. He can break tackles, and having a young rookie there to man that spot is always a positive, so you don't have to be, reaching into the veterans to do that, whether it be, Jabril Peppers. We love Jabril doing it, but we saw him suffer a significant injury 2 years ago, which ended his season prematurely. So if you have a guy that can get it done and actually pick up some nice yards, it's always better to use a rookie in that sense, especially a mid-round guy who you can depend on. But Amari Rodgers is really interesting. This past year, he finished with 77 receptions for over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. That was his best season to date. He really showed out, and I think that's primarily the reason why his stock is kind of middling right now. It's kind of in the 4 to 5 range because it was his really only year of big-time production. The 1,020 yards, 7 scores, that blows away his other years. His second best year was in 2018 when he had 575 yards and 4 touchdowns. So when you're looking at his numbers, you say, okay, he really had his best season in his senior year. It's not enough to say, he's a round 1 prospect, even a round 2 prospect. He did have a very good Senior Bowl, so that probably boosted his stock a little bit. But if the Giants are in the 4th, 5th round and they're sitting there like Amari Rodgers still on the board, you might want to take a shot at him because he can plug that punt returner role, that kick returner role, but he can also, be a developmental guy. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Derek Dillon in terms of that speed vertical threat, but he's also a bigger guy and he has good hands. So I think he would be even more refined and probably have a bit more of an edge over Derek Dillon, who was an undrafted free agent out of LSU. But Amari Rodgers, what they're saying about him is that he's going to play kind of a slot. He's a slot-specific receiver. They're going to have to give him the ball in that facet if they do let go of Golden Tate, if they do let him walk, or, really just cut him in free agency, which is probably going to happen. They might want to replace him with somebody in the middle rounds, if not a guy like Jalen Waddle in the first round. So that's kind of the argument here. Rodgers is a good developmental prospect. He's a little bit older, as a senior, so he's coming out of 4 years at college. So, he's had that experience, especially at a big-time college with a big-time quarterback. He's won a bowl game. He's won a national championship, so he's been in the big spotlight. I'd like to see the Giants maybe take a shot on him if he was there in the middle rounds. He has pretty reliable hands. He's physical. He's like a running back playing slot receiver, so he can break tackles, which is really, really attractive to me because I like guys' yards after the catch, especially in the slot. And he can be a vertical threat. He actually had a couple nice catches downfield, and he uses his hands a lot. He's not a body catcher, which is what Anthony and I were talking about before the video. He doesn't haul in the ball with his body, which oftentimes can create problems. He really is good at catching with his hands, which you saw on those go routes downfield. He would haul those down. He'd really stretch and make really nice catches. So that was something that stood out to me. I think, he might need a year or two of refinement, but he could be an immediate punt returner, kick returner that would be influential on special teams. Anthony, what are you thinking about Amari Rodgers? How do you see him fitting into this team and system?
Yeah, I think Amari Rodgers in the NFL has one of two avenues that he could take, right? And it won't be up to him. It'll be up to the coaching staff. One is that he continues to be a slot receiver. Now, I think he can be very productive as a slot receiver in the NFL with some time to develop, maybe in the right system. Certain factors depending on where he ends up, right? So I think that he is a solid slot receiver, and when you watch his film, he actually kind of reminds me of Golden Tate in a way, because he really goes up there. Golden Tate's definitely more of a body catcher, right? Golden Tate is always just like catching the ball with his chest. But Amari Rodgers is definitely a guy who catches the ball away from his body, has the ability to go up there and make some contested catches, which is surprising, from his height, 5'10", 210, which I think is a similar build to Golden Tate. Then you also talk about his yards after the catch. His ability to make plays with the ball in his hands is really, really impressive, and that's why he kind of reminds me of Golden Tate. Now, in terms of his alignment, in 2020, he had 650 snaps. 536 of them were in the slot. Only 109 of them were out wide. So he's very much a slot receiver in college, and he probably will continue to be a slot receiver in the NFL. He did go for 1,000 yards. One thing that's really impressive is he caught 77 passes this year on only 99 targets. Now, that's an insane catch rate. That percentage is very, very high. And he really does a lot after the catch. He breaks a lot of tackles, everything in between. A lot of his touchdowns came from 20-plus yard plays, so he is a big play threat. 5 of his touchdowns this season came on 20-plus yard passes. He was 6 for 12 on those deep passes. He also had a lot of yards off of screens, okay? He had 237 screen yards, so a lot of that production that we're seeing from, being a 1,000-yard receiver, maybe you could say that's kind of a misleading statistic, right? Because a lot of that was through scheme-based. It was through the screen passes. So his average depth of target was 7.7 yards, so he's not necessarily going for the home run every single time. And he does have the most slot catches this season out of this draft class with 68 and 917 yards out of the slot. But he only had one contested catch in 2020, according to Pro Football Focus. So you're really talking about a guy who is a slot receiver. He's not really, like we saw him at the Senior Bowl go up there and make a few impressive contested catches, so he has the ability to do it, but we don't really see him do it much in college. So we're talking about a guy who you can really develop in the middle rounds here, and a guy who you want to get the ball in space and let him run. Maybe throw in some screen passes, some jet sweeps, Maybe even, this is something that Pro Football Focus also threw out there, maybe even move him to running back. That's the second avenue that he could take. You mentioned his build is very similar to Kareem Hunt's. Well, that makes a lot of sense because he could maybe play that Kareem Hunt role in a backfield. Maybe he goes in there as a nice change of pace back, has the tackle breaking ability, has really nice receiving skills. I think that he could fit really nicely into that role, and that's kind of what you're talking about when you're looking at these prospects that are projected to go in the 5th round, like Amari Rodgers. You're talking about guys that you see nice traits and you want to mold them into something, at least into solid depth. And I see a lot of nice traits for him in the slot, and I actually do see some nice traits for him if he were to move into the backfield. His pro comparison is Ty Montgomery. Everybody remembers him. He was receiver, switched to running back. He was a pretty solid running back and a pretty solid receiver out of the backfield. So I really do see that pro comparison for Amari Rodgers. I think that's really interesting. But you can't deny there's some impressive receiving skills, right? With the way that he catches the ball. His routes are really nice. I've watched him run a really nice double move on the film. So he's got a lot of really nice slot receiver traits, so maybe it will be best for him to stay there, but I'm interested to see if a team actually does explore putting him in the backfield, considering his ability to make plays after the catch with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, and he has a pretty limited route tree, but I think that's because he plays mostly in the slot. Daniel Jones is a pretty accurate passer across the board, except when you're going to like the left side of the field, like left boundary. That's kind of when his weaknesses display, but if you're having a guy, you're playing a West Coast style offense, which kind of meshes with Jason Garrett's style. It's very dink and dunk. You're trying to get to the first down marker. You're not going downfield playing vertical ball all the time. You're really just, posting Evan Ingram up on curl routes or just sitting in the middle of the field within like 5 yards of line of scrimmage. We saw that a lot. And I think Amari Rodgers would actually fit that pretty well. I think it would offer another option underneath and really draw some attention because Golden Tate his biggest impact came on those deep balls that they would just toss up when man coverage and he would come down with it. He didn't really make much of an impact in the intermediate to short portion of the field. Amari Rodgers would thrive in that area. And having a guy like Kareem Hunt, just the body frame at least, but with better hands, that's what kind of entices me about him. Like he is a guy that you can develop. He is somebody you could look to, refine and actually build around. Not build a scheme around or anything like that, but really fit into a specified role and have him develop in that facet. So I kind of like him in that area, and immediately he can be a punt returner, kick returner, which is the value he provides as a mid-round pick off the bat. And if injuries do arise, which they do in the NFL, the Giants don't have a necessarily tailored slot receiver right now, except for Sterling Shepard, who they also like to play outside. He played more snaps outside, so I think if they got Amari Rodgers, he can make an impact pretty quickly in the slot, and he would be somebody that you can refine, develop over the course of a year or two, and that might end up being a quality player down the line that actually is impactful. So that's what I like about him, Anthony. But tell me a little about Tamorrion Terry, the next guy we're going to talk about out of FSU. What does Tamorrion Terry offer the Giants? What kind of strengths does he have and qualities that he is composed of?
Okay, Tamorrion Terry is a guy that a lot of fans are really excited about because he has pretty rare traits. He's 6'4", 210 pounds. He is that big body wide receiver that Giants fans really want to see on the roster, right? But he also has insane speed. I read somewhere that he might run in the 4.3s, definitely 4.4s. He seems like he's very fast. He is a fast wide receiver. And he is also very good with the ball in his hands, which is interesting. Usually when you see a guy who's 6'4", 210 pounds, you expect him to be that huge catch radius, box you out, go get the ball kind of guy, but he's really not. He's 6'4", but he kind of plays like he's 5'11". And in some ways, that's a great thing. In some ways, that's not the best thing, right? Because he's really not going up there and dominating in these 50-50 balls sometimes, but he is catching the ball, behind the line of scrimmage, taking a screen pass and going 58 yards to the house. He has that ability, which is really rare and interesting. I'm not as high on Tamorrion Terry as I think Alex or many other fans are. I don't see his skill set necessarily being as translatable, but as a nice sixth-round prospect where he's projected to go, sixth round, I would love to take a chance on him. The traits are there. There's something to mold. It's like when we were talking about Caleb Farley with The Entertainer. Like, the traits are there. You just got to mold it in. Now, Caleb Farley is far more advanced than Tamorrion Terry. He's far more along in his process than Tamorrion Terry is, but still, it's the same kind of line of thinking that he has the ability to mold into something greater than what he is right now. So that's kind of what I like about Tamorrion Terry. Couple things I don't like. There are some red flags, okay? He had a few injuries in college. He just within the last year, underwent a minor knee surgery, so that's not too big of a deal. It was minor. He came back. He recovered. He's fine. But I'll say he had some problems with the coaching staff over at FSU. He was seen screaming at the wide receivers coach on the sideline during the middle of the Miami game. He also was publicly disdain of the coaching staff and the way that they handled the coronavirus testing back in August. He made a public comment, publicly criticized the team. So that's usually not something you want to do. Usually you want to keep that stuff in the house. I understand his concern and frustration, though. That's something that we really need transparency on, and he wasn't getting transparency. So I understand why he was frustrated enough to go public about it. But, in the NFL, that probably won't fly. You have to keep those things private, especially Tamorrion Terry being a late-round prospect. He's going to be a depth piece. He can't go, as a depth piece, you can't start criticizing the team publicly. You're just going to get cut from the team. That's that. So, I respect his courage. He was pretty courageous going ahead and criticizing the team publicly, and he had a good reason, but, it's maybe not the best thing to do while you're trying to get into the NFL. So one thing that I'll say, he has a very limited route tree, a lot of just go routes, nothing crazy. He's not a route runner. He's not really refined in his skill set at all. He makes some really nice catches. He gets the ball, and he makes a lot of really nice plays with the ball in his hands. That's really what's exciting, though, because he moves just different for a guy that size. He's so quick, so shifty, breaking tackles, taking it up the sideline, hitting those angles and just going. That stuff is impressive. I just want to see more from him. I wanted to see more from him as a true receiver, not as a playmaker with the ball in his hands. I wanted to see more as a receiver with a guy who's 6'4", but that's why his skill set is rare. That's why there's a lot to mold there, and that's why he's a late round project, right? This is a guy the Giants really could take a chance on in the later rounds, and I would be very excited about it. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good analysis, I would say, and just to build on the red flags, I'm not going to sensationalize all of them because they were, coronavirus related. I mean, I do think that all the players deserve some sort of transparency when it comes to those things. In addition to that, I don't know why he was screaming to the Miami wide receiver coach. Maybe he was wide open or they're not utilizing him enough, or he thought he could beat his cornerback. They didn't give him any chances. We've seen Odell Beckham Jr. do that. We've seen Tyreek Hill do that. We've seen a lot of amazing players yell at their coaches because of, not being utilized properly. This is not something that, you're going to just... You can get away with that at the NFL level if you actually can get away with it at the NFL level. But Tamorrion Terry, again, as Anthony mentioned, he's a late-round pick. They're not going to take that crap in the NFL. They're going to be like, dude, you literally have not proven anything. You're not a first-round pick. You're not Jamar Chase. You're not Odell Beckham Jr. You're not Devontae Adams. You're Tamorrion Terry from FSU. We don't even know who you are. So that's the difference between being an all-star elite player that, can yell at their coaches and being a sixth-round depth piece who yells at your coaches. Big difference there. So when it comes to Tamorrion Terry, though, like Anthony mentioned, he is a big 6'4" guy that moves like he's 5'11", 5'10". He is very shifty, pretty elusive with his footwork. He's nifty. I do like him as a prospect, but as a late-round prospect, he's a guy that could be a good gunner on special teams and offer that kind of value for Joe Judge, which he likes from the late-round picks. He actually forces most of those rookies to build their way through the special teams unit just to get to the starting unit, just to get to a depth rotational piece on defense or offense. We saw Cam Brown. He had to fight his way through special teams just to get a few snaps on the defensive line. Carter Coughlin did the same thing. A lot of these guys, the late-round picks at least, that was their goal. Get good on special teams and make your way to the active roster. And that's Joe Judge's component. He loves to do that, and I really respect that because it forces you to really compete and win those position battles. And Tamorrion Terry is a guy who I could see making an impact as a gunner on special teams immediately. Given his go route speed, he can get down the field quickly. He's strong. Now, one of the biggest cons about him is that he doesn't have the best hands. And that scares the crap out of me because, Evan Ingram, we've seen him drop the ball over and over again, the running joke. And, Tamorrion Terry has similar issues, whether it's concentration or a lack of fundamentals. It shows up. He does drop the ball occasionally. Darius Slayton had the same thing, and he was, a fifth-round pick? So we know that these problems can be alleviated. Darius Slayton did get rid of those problems for the most part. He does drop the ball occasionally.
For the most part, yeah.
For the most part. He does drop the ball occasionally, and I know, I'm not going to, just hide that fact. But I think he's still, Slayton has room to grow. He's going to get better with his hands. I think Tamorrion Terry has a similar skill set in terms of just speed. I think he's really a bigger version of Darius Slayton, just pushing the field on the go routes. He's not as aggressive as I'd like him to be at the catch point. Like Anthony mentioned, he's a big guy, but on 50-50 balls, he doesn't really show that elite ability to high point it, that aggressiveness that you want. He really is just dominant when throwing the ball downfield because he has that blazing speed and that size that he's going to win if you're going to try and jam him at the line of scrimmage, he's going to beat you, and then he's going to run right by you. He also has decent double moves, some sluggos that you'd like to see from a guy of that size. He is athletically gifted. That's what I will say. When you are in the late rounds like that, when you're in the 5th and 6th rounds, you're going for athletically gifted, not, refined, fundamentalistic. You're going to be a day one starter. You're going for guys that could end up being a starter. And we saw the Giants last year. The thing about where they are actually being projected, 5th and 6th rounds with Amari Rodgers and Tamorrion Terry, the Giants utilized those picks and ended up having a lot of value from them. Think about Shane Lemieux. Shane Lemieux ended up starting half the season for them. Even Darnay Holmes in the 5th round ended up as their starting slot corner. These guys, they expect them to be starting or at least contributing right away, which is what scares me a little bit about Tamorrion Terry. I think Amari Rodgers could be an immediate impact player just in terms of in a specified role. I think he could get some snaps and actually provide some value. Tamorrion Terry, not so much. I think he needs a couple years, maybe a year or two to really refine his abilities. I could even see him going undrafted, to be honest with you. But the thing about him is it's the athletic upside that you're counting on. It's the special teams value that you're counting on. But for the most part, he is an intriguing player that does have some really nice qualities that I would take a bet on in the 6th, 7th round if he was available.
Yeah, I don't really see him going undrafted. I think a team is going to see those athletic traits and kind of say, okay, we got to at least take a chance on him, I see the argument for him maybe going undrafted. It wouldn't be totally shocking to me if it happened, but I really think that realistically a team is going to look at those traits, and I don't think he even makes it to the 7th round. I think he goes early 6th, maybe even in the 5th round, just because a team is going to look at his athletic traits and say, we have something that we can build here. This is a project. All these late round picks are projects. You said it best. You know, you're not looking for refined route runners in these later rounds. You're looking for projects. You're looking for guys that you can maybe mold into quality starters, and you just want to take a chance on these players, right? And again, this is a very loaded wide receiver class. A guy like Tamorrion Terry is, going to fall even further down the board just because there's so much wide receiver talent in this draft class. Same thing happened last year. We saw a lot of undrafted guys who were really impressive. Austin Mack really should have been a drafted player. He was pretty well put together as soon as he got to the NFL. He's a guy that really should have been drafted, but he fell into the undrafted range because of how talented that wide receiver class was. So I could see it happen with Tamorrion Terry. I could see it happening with some of these late round guys. But there is just a lot of talent in this wide receiver class, and these are two guys who I think are nice sleepers, nice little gems, diamonds in the rough. Two guys that I think a team will take a chance on and will likely be able to mold into quality players. I think both of these players have very nice ceilings, and the floor is very low. That's why they're projects. They got to prove themselves. But if I got to go with my favorite of the two prospects, I'm actually going to lean Amari Rodgers. I like Amari Rodgers a little more. I think that he's a little more of a safe bet. I think there's a lot of risk behind Tamorrion Terry. So Amari Rodgers is my choice if I'm picking between these two players. And low-key, I think with Amari Rodgers, I'm definitely, as soon as I draft him, if I'm the GM, I'm definitely going to immediately see what he has at running back. I'm going to see how he can contribute there. Because we talk about a guy like Curtis Samuel, a guy who can really do it all, can contribute at running back, slot receiver, and even on the outside sometimes. I kind of see that with Amari Rodgers. I see a lot of yards after catch. I see a lot of tackle breaking ability. So I'd like to see him in the backfield, maybe as a scat back, third down receiving option out of the backfield. I think that he would really fit into that role, but not hold him to that role. Let's be, versatile with him. Let's see how he does in the slot where he was really good in college. Let's see how he does in the backfield. I think there's just more diversity there with Amari Rodgers and a nice solid baseline of talent, tackle breaking talent, and route running, all of that. So I actually really do like Amari Rodgers, and I see him being a really solid steal in the later rounds. If the Giants do decide to go wide receiver in those middle rounds, keep adding depth, I think that he's the perfect Golden Tate replacement as well, because Golden Tate, in the prime of his career, was kind of like a running back, but he was really good at playing wide receiver. So he would just catch a lot of screen passes and rack up a ton of yards after catch, and he was the yak king, right? That was Golden Tate. So I could really see realistically Amari Rodgers turning into a Golden Tate type player.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I would go with Amari Rodgers over Tamorrion Terry is simply based on the multiple aspect that he has, like you mentioned. The ability to play slot, the ability to maybe play as a scat back receiver. Deion Lewis is gone. The Giants do no longer have Deion Lewis. He's a free agent this year. You could draft a guy like Amari Rodgers and replace Deion Lewis overnight, and he's a little bit stronger. He might even be a better pass blocker if you were to refine him in that ability. But for the most part, I like the multiple aspect he brings. I don't think Tamorrion Terry is going to blow this offense up like immediately. I don't think, maybe he's a developmental guy, but I think Amari Rodgers offers more value in terms of being able to play multiple positions. He's also a very good return man you could utilize right away. He's an immediate return man. He breaks tackles. He has decent hands. He's reliable, physical style of player. He actually really fits the mold of Joe Judge's mentality. He can play multiple positions. He can serve on special teams, and he's a really tough physical player. That's what Joe Judge loves. He loves tough physical guys. So I see Amari Rodgers as a more likely selection for the Giants if they were going to go between either two, if they were both on the board at the same time. I think Amari Rodgers will likely go earlier than Tamorrion Terry by a round or so, but that's to be seen. We'll see what goes on there. But Tamorrion Terry, again, pretty interesting prospect there. I would take a shot on him in the 6th or 7th round, just as a developmental piece, maybe a gunner on special teams he can offer in his first year. That's kind of what I feel. Any last words?
Yeah, I'm gonna touch on that point because I forgot to. Tamorrion Terry, I think, would play a really nice gunner if he's willing to accept that role. Special teams. A lot of these, late round rookies immediately get thrown onto special teams. That's where they get to develop. Joe Judge knows that better than anybody, right? So I think that Tamorrion Terry actually looks like he would be a really solid gunner in the NFL in terms of his speed and length. I think that he could really get down the field quickly and make some nice plays that way. And then, as you mentioned earlier with Amari Rodgers, I think that he could be a really nice special teams player as a return man. So both of these guys, I'd love to take a chance on them. They can instantly contribute on special teams, and then we can develop them, see where they go from there.
Yep, I think that's the perfect analysis, really looking at them as special teams-oriented players in year one, with Amari Rodgers a little bit more upside in terms of contributing on offense. Tamorrion Terry, I feel as though he's a special teamer until he proves otherwise. They already have Darius Slayton, who's more refined as their go route runner. They don't need Tamorrion Terry in there if Darius Slayton already has that ability and already is refined in that ability, especially knowing the offense and the verbiage under Jason Garrett. So I feel like it's kind of a conflict of interest if you're going to do that, unless you're taking a shot on him as a developmental piece and a special teams player. But as always, guys, thank you so much for tuning into Fireside Giants, breaking down Amari Rodgers and Tamorrion Terry. We will catch you guys on the next video. Make sure to subscribe, like below on YouTube, and much love. I hope you had an awesome weekend.